Okay, folks, this is three big stories, but it's really one big story, and it's an extended edition because it has to be. So, we're going to talk about the Senate border deal, what the House is doing with their Israel only bill, and how all of this might play out because it's important. We're going to start here with this Politico article. Now, the Politico article is not very favorable toward Republicans, and there's a reason for that. But I think it's very explanatory of what's actually happening and why. I'm also going to preface with this. If you don't know me, I'm a Republican, conservative, and I support the idea of an immigration bill, but not over and above doing the funding for Ukraine. Like, we need to fund Ukraine, even though I'm like, well, yeah, it's a good idea to get the immigration thing done, but I wouldn't necessarily couple it together. I would say do it alone first and get it done. I know that some of you are going to put comments in here like, you're just a Magna shill or something along those lines, or why don't you switch parties? I can't switch parties because the other side wouldn't have me. I'm not a MAGA shill. I'm not an internationalist. I'm not a isolationist. I'm just a conservative, and that's how I see things. But part of what conservatism at least was founded on three pillars, and one of those was foreign policy, and that's where my thinking is. Okay, so strong foreign policy and supporting Ukraine is a very important thing. Now, this article explains a lot to me. Why the border deal happened, Republicans held Europe for ransom. Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Danish prime minister, he was meeting with some congressmen. He told them he had restricted migration and held down taxes, and those are stances that even conservative Freedom Caucus might admire. He was trying to draw parallels to Republican ideology, recalled Representative Ken Buck, who helped him convene the meeting. Then Rasmussen addressed his real agenda, a passionate appeal for aiding Ukraine. Okay, so that's why he was there. Rasmussen, who is also a former head of NATO, it was a brief immersion in the for him. It was a brief immersion in the brute transactional politics that now governs the U.S. Congress, even the most sensitive matters of national security. Now, it's always been transactional, but on here, this is clearly a you give me this, I'll give you that. The group that met with Rasmussen, which included at least two Freedom Caucus members, heard him out politely and even sympathetically, according to Buck and others in the room. They liked his argument that holding the line against Russia would send a message to China about American resolve. I believe that firmly. This is why we need to prioritize this. She is watching. We need to make sure that authoritarians don't get the idea that this is a good idea all over the world. Even more resonant was Rasmussen's scathing criticism of the Biden administration's pullout of Afghanistan, a costly error, he said, that emboldened enemies of democracy and invited the invasion of Ukraine. I think that's partly true as well. Representative Greg Murphy of North Carolina put his calculus out on the table. This is what you need to understand about what's going on and why it's going on. So Murphy told Rasmussen that the price for backing Ukraine must be a crackdown at the border with Mexico. Murphy said he agreed with Rasmussen about the war on the merits, but saw war funding as crucial leverage in a separate policy negotiation with Joe Biden. Has nothing to do with this. I like the idea as it is, but we got to use this to get that. That's all that's going on here. It's shameful, shouldn't happen, but that's what they're doing. Blaming Biden for having, quote, invited his own country to be invaded, unquote, by migrants, he said the Ukraine issue was the best tool for forcing the president's hand. When you have fulcrums, you have to use them, he said. We have to use what we can, sadly enough, with the conflict in Ukraine. That theory of governing is not new to Washington. It's been a regular feature of legislative politics for decades, but this mode of brinksmanship has become more ordinary and more dangerous. It used to be considered radical to shut the government down over a spending dispute. Now the future of European security is a bargaining chip in an unrelated policy battle. That paragraph right there, that's exactly what's going on. It's unrelated to Ukraine. There might not even be a grudge about Ukraine, as with this particular congressman, but they're using Ukraine in order to leverage immigration border control. Right now, this approach is working. It's as if Ukraine were to disintegrate, it's by no means clear that most voters would punish lawmakers who thwarted the war effort. My constituents are asking, what's the end game? Buck told me, continuing a forever war in this area is not something that we want to keep footing the bill for. So there's no great desire. They're not against it, but there's no great desire to actually do it. And they're using it because it's a small priority in their minds, and it shouldn't be. It's a smaller priority as opposed to immigration. And that comes out in the polling. Look at what happened in New Hampshire. 41% of the voters in the New Hampshire Republican primary came out and said immigration was the #1 issue. Okay, so that's almost all of the article. A little bit more. Sultansburg was greeted in much the same way as Rasmussen. Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, is a conservative think tank, opened the event by saying that there could be no further support for Ukraine until the border, quote, is at least as secure as it was a few years ago, unquote. Now, what do they mean a few years ago? When Biden came into office, he placed a couple of executive orders into place, undoing what Donald Trump had done. And in doing that, it changed the migration pattern significantly. More people spilled over the border. I know that some say it's just demographic trends or the economy. No, there were policy changes. Biden changed it. Biden undo it, but he's not, and he's not using these tools. So they feel that they have to have laws that are getting them where they're trying to go. Okay, so next, U.S. House Representatives Speaker says he will bury the draft budget for Ukraine. So Johnson said this bill is even worse. That's a Senate bill that just came across, is even worse than we expected and won't come close to ending the border catastrophe the president has created. Again, have empathy for the other side. Both sides, right? Okay, so if you're a liberal, look at this and say, the conservatives, they feel that Biden has caused this. Conservatives, if you're looking at this, what did they want on their side of the equation? How do we bridge this gap? They want Ukraine aid. They want to have certain things with the border. How can we meet somewhere in the middle? We have to work together in order to get there. And neither side can just push the other over. Both sides need each other in order to get whatever deals can be potentially done. This was interesting to me. This is Republicans against Trump. Less than an hour after Trump urged Republicans not to do anything to secure the border because it might help Biden politically, House Republican leadership issued a new statement vowing to kill the bipartisan immigration Ukraine bill. Any consideration of this Senate bill in its current form is a waste of time. It's dead on arrival in the House. We encourage the U.S. Senate to reject it. Now, if that's what's going on, it's all about politics. But I don't think it is just all about politics. What does Mike Johnson say that he needs? Well, they put forward H.R. 2, and that's when the Congress first started. The Senate didn't take it up. They weren't willing to look at it. They weren't willing to bring it to a debate, to vote on it. Now, but for many months, it's just languished. Okay, so that's where the House stands. Where does the Senate stand? And let's look at the component of the Senate bill. So the U.S. Senate unveils a $118 billion bill on border security aid for Ukraine and Israel. The U.S. Senate on Sunday unveiled a $118 billion bipartisan border security bill that would also provide aid to Ukraine and Israel, but it promptly slammed into opposition from the House of Representatives. Well, it's a very different bill in its nature. It's not doing many of the things in H.R. 2. It's doing some other things that may work or may not work, depending on how you're looking at it. Speaker Mike Johnson declared it dead on arrival. This bill is even worse than we expected. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said that he would take steps to hold an initial vote on the bill on Wednesday. So we'll see how that plays out. Some progressive Democrats are angry the measure does nothing to provide a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented people. So they use the language undocumented people, where Republicans are using the language illegal immigrants because they broke the law coming in. Right? Either way, it's the same people, and Democrats want to make them citizens. Republicans want to say, wait, what are you doing? That's not okay for them to do this. And we're also concerned about both sides are also concerned about those that truly need asylum, but how to separate that from people that are just coming in or bad actors or those kinds of things. In addition, the $20.23 billion for border security, the bill included $60 billion in support for Ukraine with the war in Russia, $14.1 billion in security assistance for Israel, $2.244 billion for U.S. Central Command and the conflict in the Red Sea, $4.83 billion for support for the Indo-Pacific. Okay, so that's what we're looking at with this. A little bit more about this bill specifically. U.S. Senate border bill, what you need to know. This was from Al Jazeera, and they did a pretty decent job. 370-page bill, which would give the government emergency powers to refuse entry to migrants crossing the border or to quickly expel those who had already entered the U.S. But Biden already has most of this power and he didn't do anything. That's going to be the argument that I don't mean MAGA conservatives or MAGA Republicans. I mean, like, this is the argument that Ben Shapiro was making this morning when I was listening to that, to see his analysis about that. So it's got some problems and might actually be in some ways worse, but it'll at least go to committee, hopefully, if they can get it passed in the Senate, to then let's see if a conference can work out some things. Hold on. The new bill has introduced the concept of a trigger, which will be tipped when the number of migrants encountering border officials crosses an average of 5,000 over the course of the week. The bill also gives the president the power to shut the southern border with Mexico if more than 4,000 migrants attempt to cross the border in a week. But they can also ports in order to try to get into the country as well and go through the same rigmarole there. So the bill might not do exactly what it's supposed to do, but at least they're making progress in putting the thing together. The bill would require the government to process at least 1,400 migrants per day at border crossings, and it would maintain some of the protections for people who fear torture and persecution after being deported. And it caps the number of days and the emergency powers can be used per year. So those that fear torture or persecution, I think all sides are okay with that. I think it's the chain migration or the asylum in the United States that is not related to that. Chain migration means, like, if you bring a kid in, well, their whole family comes with them. Wait a minute. And they're not necessarily going to show back up for court or those kind of things. Okay, what else do we know? The bill would direct about $20 billion in addition to additional law enforcement on the U.S. border with Mexico to combat drug trafficking. Okay. About $60 billion in additional aid has been earmarked for Ukraine. About $20 billion of this is to replenish U.S. stockpiles of equipment transferred to Ukraine, and another $13 billion is to Kyiv to buy more munitions from U.S. suppliers. So far, so good, but the devil's in the details with the border, the immigration part of it. Senate plan directs $14.1 billion to Israel. About $5.2 billion of this funding is for missile defense systems. It's going to strip some of this from UNRWA after Israel accused 12 of its Palestinian employees of being involved in the Hamas October 7 attack. The bill allocates $2.4 billion for operations around the Red Sea and $2.6 billion on efforts to deter China by replacing munitions to Taiwan. Okay, so that's what the bill is going to do. Now, the real question is, like, what's really happening? Are they having a policy dispute or are they having a political dispute? I think right now there is a political element. Certainly, Donald Trump wants to run on this issue. Again, 41% of Republican voters, the highest ranking thing in New Hampshire was immigration. And those who were most concerned about immigration voted for Trump overwhelmingly, like 70% of those, as opposed to Haley. So if you could take away the immigration issue, that takes a lot of the steam out of Trump's progress, right? So there's an argument to be made that it's all political, that they're just doing that so he has that so he can win. I don't think that that's all that's going on. That might be part of it, and I would imagine it is part of it. But if you are the Democrats and you could cut a deal in order to take the steam out of his sails or the wind out of his sails by cutting some deal, cut some deal. I mean, you can solve a problem. It's not festering for an entire year, the whole country being upset, take some wind out of his sails. Like, look, you're actually behind. This is February 1st. Trump is narrowly beating Biden in general election rematch. You wouldn't believe it. I'm not making this up. This isn't Fox News. This is CNN politics. You see this over here with NBC. Just yesterday, Trump is beating Biden again in a head-to-head matchup with, like, a legitimate poll from NBC News. I think if you could create some kind of deal, not only could you get Ukraine support, but it would also take some wind out of Trump's sails. But I think the broader issue is that it's a policy issue that they have to work out. Like, and the way of getting there, to my mind, is if you could. So here's just a thought experiment. The Republicans in the House said, pass H.R. 2. That's our demand. The Senate bill was something very different than H.R. 2. But if you're Biden, if you could pass H.R. 2 and make them put up or shut up, they would kind of have to give you everything that you wanted on Ukraine in order to get H.R. 2. That's the way. And then it takes immigration largely off the table for Trump, who is running largely on immigration. So, and it seems like a kind of a win-win-win unless you're MAGA, in which case then that is perceived perhaps as a loss. But it should, even if you're MAGA, be perceived as a win because that's what you theoretically want anyway. But okay, that's my analysis. Tell me what I'm missing. Don't tell me all Republicans are evil and I'm a MAGA shill or whatever else. I'm really not. I'm just trying to help you understand how different parties are thinking along these ways. I understand if you're a Democrat and you're upset and you're thinking, yeah, those Republicans, they're just using this as leverage. They are using it as leverage, and shame on Republicans for using it as leverage. They shouldn't be. They should be funding Ukraine. But this is what's going on. I just want you to understand the full picture. Okay, that's context. That's your one big story for today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for the likes and the shares and not unsubscribing. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.